My parents spent my entire childhood preparing me to sacrifice for my sister. The strange thing is, they never actually said those words. Nobody sat me down and explained it. Nobody announced it. Nobody admitted it. Instead, it happened the way these things usually happen. 1,000 tiny moments, 1,000 little decisions, 1,000 excuses. And by the time I was old enough to understand what was happening, the system was already built. My sister just benefited from it. I lived inside it. The moment that finally made me understand came when I was 38 years old. But the story really started much earlier. I was 7, my sister Emily was 5, and she broke my birthday present 3 hours after I opened it. I still remember that toy. A purple electronic keyboard. Nothing expensive, nothing fancy. But I had wanted it for months. I talked about it constantly, drew pictures of it, circled it in catalogs. The kind of obsession only children are capable of. When I unwrapped it that morning, I thought it was the greatest thing I'd ever seen. By lunchtime, Emily had poured orange juice all over it. Completely ruined. The keys stopped working instantly. The speaker crackled. Then died. I cried. Of course I cried. I was 7. What happened next became the pattern for the rest of my life. My mother hugged Emily. Not me, Emily. Because Emily felt bad, my father told me not to overreact. Then they spent the afternoon comforting my sister, because she was upset that I'd gotten upset. I wish I were exaggerating. I'm not. 7 years old, I learned something important. In our house, Emily's feelings mattered more than mine. That lesson repeated itself constantly. When Emily forgot homework, I was expected to help. When Emily got poor grades, I was expected to tutor her. When Emily fought with friends, I was expected to fix it. When Emily got into trouble, somehow I became responsible. The weird thing is that I didn't resent her. Not at first. Because when you're a kid, you don't understand systems. You only understand people, and Emily was just my little sister. Funny, energetic, messy, emotional. The real problem wasn't Emily. The real problem was my parents. They built an entire family around protecting her from consequences. And every time they did it, they taught her a dangerous lesson. Somebody else will fix this. Usually me. By the time we reached high school, the differences were impossible to ignore. I got good grades. Emily struggled. I worked after school. Emily didn't. I saved money. Emily spent money. I planned. Emily improvised. And somehow, Emily was still the favorite. One Christmas, my parents bought her a car. A real car, not new, but nice, reliable, clean. I remember standing in the driveway watching her scream with excitement. Everyone was crying, hugging, taking pictures. Beautiful family moment. The problem, I was older, by 2 years. And when I turned 16, I got a lecture about responsibility. No car, no help, nothing. When I finally bought my own used car, I paid for every dollar myself. My parents called that character building. Apparently, Emily didn't need character, only transportation. Looking back, I should have seen where this was heading. But hope makes people stupid, especially when it comes to family. You keep thinking fairness is coming. You keep believing people will eventually notice. You keep waiting for balance. It never arrives. Not when favoritism becomes part of a family's identity. After high school, I attended community college while working part-time. Emily attended a university my parents absolutely couldn't afford. Guess who paid? My parents. Actually, that's not completely true. They borrowed money, lots of it. Student loans, personal loans, credit cards, anything they could access. At the time, they called it an investment. They believed Emily was destined for greatness. That's the phrase they loved. Emily is destined for greatness. I heard it so often I could have printed it on a t-shirt. The reality? Emily changed majors 4 times, dropped classes constantly, partied aggressively, failed repeatedly, then eventually quit. 3 years, tens of thousands of dollars, nothing to show for it. And yet somehow nobody blamed her. Instead, they blamed stress, bad professors, the school system, the economy, Mercury being in retrograde, anything except Emily. Meanwhile, I graduated, found a stable job, paid my own bills, bought my own apartment, and somehow became invisible. Responsible children often become invisible. Nobody worries about us. Nobody checks on us. Nobody helps us, because we're fine, until we're not. Then nobody notices that either. The first major crack in my relationship with my parents happened when I got engaged. His name was Daniel, and unlike my family, Daniel noticed everything. The favoritism, the double standards, the excuses, everything. At first he stayed quiet. Most outsiders do. They assume there's context they're missing. Then one night after dinner with my parents, he asked me a question nobody had ever asked before. Why do they treat you like a backup plan? I remember freezing, because I'd never heard it phrased that way. Backup plan, not daughter, not family, backup plan. The more I thought about it, the more accurate it felt. Whenever Emily needed help, my parents ran to her. Whenever my parents needed help, they ran to me. Interesting arrangement. Very convenient for everyone except me. I laughed it off, pretended it wasn't a big deal, pretended Daniel was overthinking. But the truth? He was seeing something I spent years avoiding, and things were about to get much worse. Because Emily was about to make a financial decision that would cost my parents almost everything they owned. The problem was, they didn't know it yet, and neither did I. The first time my parents borrowed money for Emily, they called it temporary. That's important. Because almost every family disaster starts with the word temporary. Temporary loan, temporary help, temporary support, temporary sacrifice. Then suddenly 10 years pass and everybody is wondering what happened. Emily was 24 when she discovered online shopping. I know that sounds ridiculous. Everybody shops online. But Emily treated online shopping the way some people discover gambling. It wasn't a habit. It became a lifestyle. At first, it seemed harmless. Packages started arriving constantly. Shoes, clothes, furniture, electronics, decorations. Subscription boxes, random junk nobody actually needs. Every time I visited my parents' house, another delivery sat on the porch. I remember asking her once, "How can you afford all this?" She laughed, actually laughed. Then said something that would become her life philosophy. "It'll work itself out." That sentence should have terrified everyone. Instead, my mother smiled, my father shrugged, and life continued. Because that's how favoritism works. The golden child doesn't need a plan. Everybody else becomes the plan. A year later, Emily got married. His name was Jason, and honestly, I almost felt sorry for him. Not because he was a bad guy, because he genuinely believed he was marrying an adult. Jason worked hard, saved money, had goals, had structure, had discipline, the exact opposite of Emily. For about 18 months, things seemed fine. Then the phone calls started. First, it was small. Jason needed help with bills. Then Jason needed help with rent. Then Jason needed help covering debt. Eventually, the truth came out. Emily had been spending money faster than they could earn it. Credit cards, store cards, personal loans, payment plans, buy now, pay later accounts, everything. And the worst part? She'd hidden most of it from her husband. When Jason finally discovered the real numbers, they were drowning. I remember sitting in my parents' kitchen listening to the story. My father looked concerned. My mother looked emotional. Emily looked like the victim. Of course she did. That was her superpower. No matter what happened, she somehow became the victim. Jason sat quietly, exhausted, defeated. And for the first time, I realized something. Emily wasn't just irresponsible. She genuinely expected other people to absorb consequences for her. That realization changed everything. Because irresponsible people eventually learn. Entitled people don't. Why would they? The system keeps rewarding them. A week later, my parents paid off $20,000 of Emily's debt. Twice like that. Gone. No repayment plan, no accountability, no conditions. Just gone. I remember staring at my father, completely stunned. Because a few years earlier, when Daniel and I needed help replacing a broken furnace in the middle of winter, my parents gave us advice. Not money, advice. Apparently, Emily got debt forgiveness. I got life lessons. Interesting system. The scary part? That wasn't even the beginning. Over the next 5 years, my parents slowly became Emily's personal emergency fund. Every problem became their problem. Every mistake became their responsibility. Every crisis became their burden. And Emily always had a crisis. Always. 1 month it was rent, next month it was medical bills, then car repairs, then legal fees, then credit card debt, then another business idea, then another emergency, then another disaster. It never ended, because consequences never arrived. My parents kept intercepting them, like human airbags. The problem with airbags is eventually they run out. My parents didn't realize that. Daniel did. I did. Even Jason eventually did. But my parents? They remained convinced they were helping. Then Jason left. Honestly, I wasn't surprised. Most people would have left sooner. The marriage lasted 6 years. By the end, Jason looked 20 years older. The divorce devastated my parents. Not because Emily was heartbroken, because it created another problem to solve. And solving Emily's problems had become their full-time hobby. The divorce settlement cost money. Moving cost money. Lawyers cost money. Life cost money. Guess who paid? My parents. Again. And that's when something happened that truly scared me. My father refinanced the house. The one asset they actually owned. The house they'd spent 30 years paying off. The house that was supposed to secure retirement. Gone. Or at least partially gone. I remember the exact conversation. Because it happened during Thanksgiving. Emily was talking about starting a boutique business. Another business. At that point, she'd already failed multiple ventures. Online store, event planning, photography, custom crafts. Every one of them collapsed. Yet somehow confidence never became a problem. Reality did, not confidence. My father announced he'd refinanced the house. The room went quiet. Even Emily looked surprised. For about 2 seconds. Then excitement replaced surprise. Because free money is exciting when somebody else carries the risk. I nearly dropped my fork. Daniel looked physically uncomfortable. How much? I asked. My father named the number. And I swear my heart stopped. It was enough money to significantly damage their retirement plans. Years of retirement plans, years gone, just like that, to fund another Emily rescue operation. I remember looking around the table, waiting, expecting someone to project. Nobody did. Not my mother, not Emily, nobody. That's when I realized something disturbing. My parents weren't helping Emily anymore. They were addicted to helping Emily. Their identities depended on it. Without Emily's problems, they wouldn't know who they were. Think about that. They needed her failures. The same way she needed their rescues. It was a perfect toxic cycle, and everybody inside it was drowning. The next few years became painful to watch. Retirement contributions stopped, savings accounts shrank, investments disappeared, yet somehow Emily's lifestyle improved, not dramatically, just enough, a nicer apartment. More vacations, new furniture, better clothes. The math never made sense. Then one evening my mother accidentally revealed something. One sentence, one tiny sentence, that changed everything. We were having dinner when she casually mentioned helping Emily with a down payment. I froze. Daniel froze. Even my father looked surprised she said it out loud. A down payment? My mother immediately realized her mistake. Too late. The silence gave her away. I remember staring at her, waiting. Finally, she admitted it. My parents had given Emily nearly all of their remaining retirement savings. Almost all of it. For a house. A house she couldn't actually afford. The room started spinning, not literally, emotionally. Because suddenly everything made sense. The refinancing, the disappearing savings, the constant financial pressure, the anxiety, the stress, everything. They weren't preparing for retirement. They were funding Emily's life. And for the first time in my life, I got angry, really angry, not annoyed, not frustrated, angry. I looked directly at my father. "What's your plan?" He looked confused. "What do you mean?" I couldn't believe the question. Actually couldn't believe it. What happens when you're 75? Silence. What happens when you're 80? More silence. Then my mother said something I'll never forget. Something that would haunt me for years. She smiled, actually smiled, then said, "We know you'll never let anything happen to us." The room went completely still. Daniel looked at me. I looked at Daniel, and suddenly, I understood everything, every sacrifice, every double standard, every expectation, every decision. My parents weren't worried about retirement. They already had a retirement plan. Me. I wasn't their daughter, not really. I was insurance, the responsible child, the backup plan, the safety net, the emergency contact, the person who'd clean up the mess, the person who'd sacrifice, the person who'd save them when Emily couldn't. And the worst part? They said it like it was obvious, like it was normal, like my future belonged to them automatically. I remember feeling cold, completely cold. Then Daniel squeezed my hand under the table, just once, a tiny gesture, but it grounded me. Because suddenly I realized something. My parents weren't preparing for old age. They were gambling on my loyalty. And they had absolutely no idea how badly that gamble was about to fail. Because 6 months later, Emily would make the biggest financial mistake of her life. A mistake so catastrophic that it wouldn't just destroy her finances. It would destroy my parents too. And when that happened, they were going to come looking for the backup plan. The collapse started with the swimming pool. I know that sounds ridiculous. Trust me. When everything finally fell apart, I kept going back to that swimming pool in my head. Because normal people don't finance swimming pools when they're already drowning in debt. Normal people don't refinance homes, empty retirement accounts, and take out personal loans while pretending everything is fine. But by then, nobody in my family was behaving normally, especially not Emily. The house my parents helped her buy should have been a fresh start. That was the dream, anyway. The fantasy. The story everybody kept telling themselves. Emily gets stable. Emily becomes responsible. Emily grows up. Emily finally figures things out. Funny thing about fantasies, reality rarely participates. The first 6 months actually seemed promising, at least from a distance. Emily posted endless photos online. Pictures of the house, pictures of decorating projects, pictures of coffee on the back patio, pictures of inspirational quotes about new beginnings. You know the type, the social media version of happiness, the carefully edited version. The version designed to convince everyone, including yourself, that life is going perfectly. My mother loved those posts, absolutely loved them. Every time Emily uploaded a photo, my mother shared it, commented on it, bragged about it. Meanwhile, Daniel and I had spent 15 years building a stable life together. Dozens of milestones, hundreds of sacrifices, thousands of hours of work. And somehow Emily's latest throw pillow generated more excitement. I wish that bothered me less than it did. But it did, because favoritism never really stops hurting. You just get better at pretending it doesn't. Then the phone calls started. Again, the same pattern, always the same pattern. First came little problems. Unexpected repairs, appliance failures, insurance issues, property taxes, maintenance costs. Suddenly, Emily discovered something shocking. Houses cost money. Apparently, this information had been hidden from her. And every time reality arrived, she called my parents. Every single time. One evening, Daniel and I were eating dinner when my mother called. I put her on speaker, big mistake. She spent 20 minutes explaining a problem with Emily's air conditioning system. 20 minutes. Not because she needed advice, because she needed validation. She needed someone to agree that helping Emily was the right thing to do. Finally, Daniel asked a simple question. A very simple question. Has Emily called an AVAC company? Silence. Long silence. Then my mother sounded offended. Actually offended. Asking her to pay for it right now would be difficult. Daniel looked at me. I looked at Daniel. Because we'd both heard it. The assumption, the expectation, the endless protection. Emily wasn't expected to solve problems, only report them. My parents would handle the rest. And they did. Every time. until they couldn't. The first real warning sign came from my father. Not intentionally, he slipped. One afternoon, he stopped by our house while Daniel was at work. We were sitting at the kitchen table drinking coffee when he casually mentioned delaying retirement. The comment barely registered at first. Then I realized what he'd said. Delaying retirement. My father had spent decades talking about retirement. Fishing trips, travel, relaxing, gardening. All those plans suddenly disappeared. Just gone. Why are you delaying retirement? He immediately looked uncomfortable. That's never a good sign. Then came the excuses. The economy, inflation, uncertainty, market conditions. The usual nonsense. I let him talk. Eventually he stopped. Then I asked again. Why? Silence. Finally he sighed. Things are tighter than expected. There it was, the truth, or at least part of it. I pushed harder. Big mistake. Because people who've spent years lying to themselves don't appreciate reality. The conversation became tense almost immediately. Defensive, awkward. Then my father finally snapped. Not everyone gets lucky. Lucky. That word hit me harder than it should have. Because according to my parents, every good thing that happened to me was luck. Stable marriage? Luck. Financial security? Luck. Career growth? Luck. Apparently 15 years of hard work counted as luck. Meanwhile, Emily could crash 3 businesses, burn through retirement funds, and somehow remain a victim of circumstances. Interesting system. Argue. Not because he was right, because I suddenly understood something. My father couldn't admit what was happening. Not yet. Because admitting reality would mean admitting he'd spent decades making terrible decisions. That's a painful thing for anyone, especially proud people. And my father was one of the proudest people alive. Then things got worse, much worse, because Emily discovered investing, specifically cryptocurrency. I wish I were joking. Apparently, somebody online convinced her she could become financially independent through strategic opportunities. Whenever somebody says strategic opportunities, disaster usually follows. This time was no different. Emily became obsessed. Videos, podcasts, online groups, forums, courses, mentors, experts. Every scam artist on the internet suddenly became her financial advisor. And somehow, my parents got dragged into it too. I found out during Easter dinner. One sentence. That's all it took. Emily casually mentioned moving money around. Daniel immediately stopped eating. I've known my husband long enough to recognize danger, and his face was screaming danger. What money? Emily smiled. That smile, the one that always appeared before something stupid. Then she explained, sort of, not clearly, not honestly, just enough. Apparently she'd convinced my parents to help fund an investment opportunity. My stomach dropped immediately, because I already knew what that meant. More money, more risk, more nonsense. And sure enough, the amount was horrifying. Not because it was huge, because it was what little remained. The final pieces, the emergency funds, the safety nets, the backup plans, everything responsible people keep for worst-case scenarios. Gone, just gone. Into an investment Emily barely understood. I remember looking at my mother, waiting, hoping, praying she'd say no. Instead, she looked excited, like a teenager discussing concert tickets. That's when I realized something disturbing. My parents weren't helping Emily anymore. Emily was controlling them. Not intentionally, not maliciously, but absolutely controlling them. Their identities revolved around rescuing her. Without that role, they wouldn't know who they were. The investment collapsed within 8 months. Of course it did. Everyone saw it coming. Everyone except Emily and my parents. The losses were devastating, truly devastating. But even then, they refused to stop. Because people don't abandon bad decisions after investing 20 years into them. They double down. That's exactly what happened. Then came the phone call. The phone call that changed everything. It arrived on a Thursday evening. I was cooking dinner. Daniel was reading in the living room. My phone lit up. Emily. Which was unusual. Emily rarely called me unless she wanted something, I answered. Immediately knew something was wrong. She was crying, not dramatic crying. Panic. And for the first time in years, I heard genuine fear in her voice. Then she said 5 words that stopped me cold. I think I'm losing the house. And suddenly, the disaster we'd all been watching approach for years was finally at the front door. The moment Emily said she was losing the house, I knew exactly what was coming next. Not because I could predict the future. Because I'd lived this pattern my entire life. Step 1, Emily creates a problem. Step 2, my parents panic. Step 3, everyone scrambles to save Emily. Step 4, somebody else pays the price. Usually my parents, sometimes me, never Emily, never. I drove over the next morning. Part of me didn't want to. Part of me was exhausted. But another stormy part still remembered the little girl who used to follow me around the backyard, asking if I wanted to play. The little girl wasn't the problem. The adult she'd become was. When I arrived, the atmosphere felt strange, heavy, like somebody had died. Emily sat at the kitchen table surrounded by paperwork, bills, bank statements, past due notices, letters, a mountain of consequences. For the first time in years, she actually looked scared. Not annoyed, not inconvenienced, scared. My mother sat beside her crying. My father stared silently at the wall. Daniel had come with me. The second he looked at the paperwork, I saw his expression change. That expression always meant the same thing. The situation was worse than advertised. Much worse. I sat down. Tell me everything. Emily started talking. At first it sounded like bad luck, then poor decisions, then terrible decisions, then complete insanity. The deeper she went, the worse it became. Missed mortgage payments, credit card debt, personal loans, second loans, private lenders, refinancing again and again and again. Every financial mistake imaginable. Somehow she managed all of them. The final number made my stomach drop. I won't say the exact amount. Honestly, it doesn't matter. What mattered was this. Emily wasn't broke. She was financially destroyed. Completely. And suddenly I realized something. The house wasn't the real problem. The house was just the first domino. Then Daniel asked the question nobody wanted to hear. How much of this did Mom and Dad guarantee? The room went silent. My father looked away immediately. My mother started crying harder. That was answer enough. Daniel repeated himself, more gently. How much? My father finally spoke. The number he gave made the room spin. Because it wasn't just retirement savings anymore. Not anymore. It co-signed loans. Multiple loans. Personal guarantees. Lines of credit. Everything. Their financial futures were tied directly to Emily's collapse. I remember staring at my parents. Actually staring. Trying to understand what I was looking at. These were intelligent people. Responsible people. People who had spent decades working hard, saving, planning, building. And they'd handed all of it to one person. One person who repeatedly proved she couldn't manage money. The irrationality of it was staggering. Then something happened that made me angrier than anything else that day. Emily started crying. Not because of the debt, not because of the house, not because of my parents. Because she felt judged. Judged, I actually laughed. A short, sharp laugh, I couldn't help it. For 30 years had protected Emily from consequences. And the moment consequences finally arrived, she felt judged. The irony was almost beautiful. Almost. Then my mother did exactly what she'd done my entire life. She moved to protect Emily. Immediately. Instinctively. Like muscle memory. Honey, nobody's blaming you. I looked at my mother, then at the paperwork, then back at my mother. Nobody's blaming her. Who exactly was responsible then? The mortgage fairy? Financial ghosts? A conspiracy? The room became tense immediately. For the first time in years, I stopped filtering myself. Stopped softening things. Stopped protecting everyone's feelings. And honestly, it felt amazing. I pointed toward the paperwork. Somebody is responsible. Silence. Because none of this happened accidentally. More silence. Then Emily stood up. Angry, defensive, predictable. She launched into a speech. Bad economy, bad timing, bad partners, bad investments. Bad luck, the greatest hits. I'd heard versions of that speech my entire life. The only thing missing was accountability, as usual. Then Daniel did something unexpected. He started adding numbers. Quietly, methodically, one document at a time. Nobody paid attention at first. Then they noticed. The room slowly went silent. Eventually, Daniel placed his calculator down and looked at my parents. I'll never forget what he said. Do you know how much you've given Emily over the years? My mother looked confused. My father looked nervous. Daniel pushed the paperwork forward. I do. Then he told them. The total years of support. Debt payments, loans, gifts, tuition, rent, cars, business ventures, mortgage help, emergency bailouts, everything. The number was enormous. Truly enormous. My mother started crying. My father looked physically ill. Emily just stared. Nobody spoke, because for the first time the entire story existed in one place, not separate incidents. Not isolated emergencies. One story, one pattern, one lifetime of financial rescue. The total exceeded what most people spend building an entire retirement. And suddenly everybody could see it. The years, the sacrifices, the consequences, everything. Then my father whispered something so quietly I almost missed it. What have we done? Nobody answered, because everyone already knew. The following weeks were chaos. Absolute chaos. Meetings with banks, lawyers, financial advisors, mortgage specialists, endless phone calls, endless paperwork, endless stress. The house entered foreclosure proceedings. The investment losses became official. The debts became real. No more pretending, no more optimism, no more fantasies, just reality, and reality was ugly, very ugly. Then came the moment I'd been expecting for years. The moment that had haunted me ever since that dinner when my mother smiled and said, "We know you'll never let anything happen to us." It happened on a Sunday afternoon. My parents invited Daniel and me over, just us, no Emily, no relatives, no distractions. The second we walked inside, I knew. This was it, the conversation. The reason I'd spent years feeling like an insurance policy instead of a daughter. We sat at the dining room table, the same table where 1,000 family dramas had unfolded, the same table where Emily had been protected, the same table where my future had quietly been volunteered for me. Finally, my father spoke. His voice sounded older somehow, smaller. "We need help." There it was, not surprising, not shocking, just inevitable. My mother immediately started crying again. Then came the details. They couldn't retire, not anymore. The debts were too large, the losses too severe, the timeline too short. Everything they'd spent decades building was gone, and then they asked, not directly, not at first. People rarely ask directly when they're ashamed. Instead, they hinted, suggested. implied, talked about family, talked about support, talked about being there for each other, the usual language. Eventually, my father said the thing I'd been dreading. "We thought maybe you could help us." The room went silent. I looked at Daniel. Daniel looked at me, and suddenly I remembered every birthday, every sacrifice, every rescue, every excuse, every moment I'd been told to understand, to be patient, to be mature, to be responsible. Because Emily needed help. Always Emily. Now the bill had arrived, and somehow they expected me to pay it, again. The difference was, I wasn't 20 years old anymore. I wasn't desperate for approval anymore. I wasn't willing to sacrifice my future for someone else's choices. Not anymore. I took a deep breath, then asked one question. A simple question. The most important question I'd ever asked my parents. What would you have done if I needed this much help? Silence. Immediate silence. Because everybody knew the answer. Including them. My mother looked down, my father closed his eyes. Nobody spoke, nobody could. Because the truth was sitting right there between us. Heavy, unavoidable, painful. And for the first time in my entire life, my parents had no defense left, no excuse, no explanation, no escape. Just truth. And what happened after that question would change our family forever. The silence after my question lasted so long that I could hear the kitchen clock ticking. Tick, tick, tick. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Because for the first time in my life, my parents were trapped inside the truth. Not my version of the truth. Not Daniel's, their own. The question hung in the air. What would you have done if I needed this much help? My mother stared at the table. My father looked exhausted. And suddenly, after decades of excuses, everybody knew the answer. Nothing. They would have done nothing. Or at least nowhere near what they'd done for Emily. The proof wasn't hypothetical. It already existed. My entire life was proof. When I bought my first car, I paid for it myself. When I paid for college, I paid for it myself. When Daniel and I bought our first home, we did it ourselves. When we struggled, we figured it out. When Emily struggled, an entire rescue team appeared. Every single time. Nobody answered my question because nobody could. The evidence was overwhelming. Eventually, my father rubbed his face, then said something I'd never heard him say before. "You're right, just 3 words." But somehow they felt heavier than everything else. My father wasn't a man who admitted mistakes. Not small ones. Certainly not life-changing ones. Yet there he was, sitting across from me, broken, defeated, admitting something he'd spent 30 years avoiding. My mother immediately started crying harder. I wish I could say that made me feel better. It didn't. Honestly, it made me feel sad. Because revenge sounds satisfying in theory. In reality, watching your parents fall apart is complicated. Very complicated. Part of me was angry, part of me was relieved, part of me was grieving. Not grieving who they were. Grieving who they never became. The parents I'd spent years hoping for. The parents who never showed up. My father leaned forward. "We failed you." Silence then. "We really failed you." The strange thing was, I wasn't waiting for those words anymore. 20 years earlier? Maybe 10 years earlier? Definitely. But now? Now they felt like reading yesterday's weather report. Accurate, but late. Very late. Then my mother finally spoke. And what she said shocked me. Not because it was dramatic, because it was honest. I always knew. The room froze. Even my father looked surprised. I stared at her. "What?" She wiped her eyes, then repeated herself. "I always knew." Nobody moved. Nobody interrupted. Then she continued, "I knew we expected more from you." Silence. "I knew we protected Emily." More silence. "I knew it wasn't fair. That one hurt. Really hurt. Because his unfairness is easier to survive than awareness. Awareness means choice. Awareness means responsibility. Awareness means they weren't blind. They knew. They just kept doing it anyway." I felt something inside me crack. Not dramatically, quietly, like a bone finally accepting it was broken years ago. Then my mother said something that explained everything. Something that had probably been true my entire life. "We never worried about you." I laughed, actually laughed. Not because it was funny, because it was absurd. Of course they didn't. I was the reliable one, the responsible one, the safe one, the child who survived, the child who adapted, the child who fixed problems. My mother kept talking. "We always thought you'd be okay." There it was, the justification, the famous justification. Responsible children hear it constantly. "We neglect you because you're strong. We prioritize your sibling because they're struggling. We burden you because you're capable. We sacrifice you because you'll survive." Sounds noble, until you realize it's still neglect, just better packaged. Then my father said something that surprised everyone, including my mother. "I think we were afraid of Emily." Silence. Complete silence. Because suddenly everything made sense. My father explained. Every time Emily failed, she exploded. Every time she faced consequences, she blamed someone. Every time someone told her no, she created chaos, arguments, drama, crises, meltdowns. So my parents took the easier path. Again and again and again, they gave in. Not because it was right, because it was easier. And over 30 years, easier became normal. The realization hit hard. Because Emily wasn't just the golden child. She'd become the center of the family. Everything revolved around managing her emotions, protecting her feelings, avoiding her reactions. Everyone adjusted themselves around Emily. Everyone except reality. Reality eventually arrives, and reality had arrived. With interest, then the front door opened. Nobody expected it. Nobody. Emily walked in. And the timing couldn't have been worse. Or better. Depending on your perspective. She immediately sensed something. The atmosphere, the tension, the exhaustion, all of it. What happened? Nobody answered. Then she looked at me. Then Daniel. Then our parents. And suddenly she understood the conversation. The one she'd been avoiding her entire life. Had finally started without her. Emily sat down. Slowly, carefully, almost nervously. I honestly can't remember the last time I'd seen her nervous. Then my father did something remarkable. Something nobody expected. He told her no, not angrily, not dramatically. Just no. We can't help you anymore. Silence. Emily blinked, confused, like she'd heard another language. My father repeated himself. We're done. The reaction was immediate, absolutely immediate. Anger, shock, disbelief, denial, everything at once. Emily launched into a speech, a familiar speech, a lifetime speech. The economy, bad luck, circumstances, stress, pressure. It's the same excuses she'd been using for decades. Only this time something was different. Nobody interrupted. Nobody comforted her. Nobody rescued her. Nobody volunteered solutions. The room remained silent. For the first time in her life, Emily was alone with her choices. And she hated it. Then she turned toward me. Of course she did, because eventually every road led to me. The backup plan, the safety net, the insurance policy. You can help. Not a question, a statement. I almost smiled, even now. Even after everything, she still assumed. I took a breath, then answered honestly, no. The room went completely silent. Emily stared at me, waiting, expecting. Certain I'd changed my mind, I didn't. No? I shook my head, no. Then she laughed. That nervous laugh people use when reality doesn't match expectations. You're serious? Yes, the next 30 minutes were ugly, really ugly. Emily cried, yelled, blamed, accused. She brought up childhood memories. Family loyalty, love, sacrifice, everything, every emotional weapon available. Nothing worked, because emotional manipulation only works when guilt exists. And for the first time in my life, the guilt was gone, completely gone. Finally, Emily stormed out, slamming the door hard enough to shake the walls. Then she disappeared, just like that. Gone. The house became quiet, very quiet. Nobody moved for several minutes. Then Daniel squeezed my hand, the same way he had years earlier, at that dinner table. When I first realized I was my parents' backup plan. Funny how life circles back sometimes. The following year changed everything. My parents sold their house. Not because they wanted to, because they had to. They moved into a small apartment, 1/3 the size, no huge yard, no guest rooms, no extra space, just enough. And honest, it was probably the first financially responsible decision they'd made in years. The adjustment was difficult, painful, humbling, but necessary. My father eventually found part-time work. My mother adjusted too, very slowly. For the first time in decades, they started living within reality instead of fantasy. Then something unexpected happened. Our relationship improved, not dramatically, not magically, but genuinely. Because for the first time, they stopped asking me to save everyone. They stopped volunteering my future. They stopped treating me like a resource and started treating me like a daughter. A little late, but still. As for Emily, life finally did what my parents never could. It taught her consequences. Lessons were expensive, very expensive. But eventually she started changing. Not immediately, not perfectly, but gradually. Without rescue, growth became mandatory. Funny how that works. 3 years later, she got a steady job, started paying debts, started living realistically, started acting like an adult. The transformation wasn't dramatic. It was slow, painful, embarrassing, human, and that's what made it real. The final moment came on my father's 75th birthday, a small family dinner, nothing fancy, no huge gathering. No performance, just family. At one point, my father raised a glass, looked directly at me, and said something I'll never forget. Thank you for not saving us. Everybody laughed. Then realized he wasn't joking. My father smiled, a real smile. We needed to learn silence then. And you deserved better. I didn't cry. I almost did, but I didn't. Because the truth is, I wasn't angry anymore, not really. The anger had burned itself out years earlier. What remained was acceptance. And acceptance is surprisingly peaceful. Looking back now, I realized something. The greatest revenge wasn't refusing to rescue them. The greatest revenge wasn't watching reality catch up. The greatest revenge wasn't being proven right. The greatest revenge was building a good life anyway, without favoritism, without support, without special treatment. While everyone else spent decades feeding the problem, I spent decades building a future, and in the end, that made all the difference.